Oh, there we go. Hello. Welcome to our sessions. I'm Xavier Ducrohet. I work at Google on the developer tools for Android.
Me too. I'm Tor Norbye. I also work on the Android tools.
So in these sessions, this is going to be tools in action, so no slides, everything in Eclipse.
There was a misprint in some versions of the schedule. So it said that this talk was going to be advanced, or you were going to be senior.
Yeah.
That's wrong. It's novice. Our talk on Thursday is going to be more advanced. This is going to be very, very high-level introduction to Android. We're going to show some of the basics, how you use the tools for the most basic things. So if you're waiting for an advanced talk, we won't be offended if you get up and leave, because we're going to be sort of giving an introduction today.
Right. Right.
All right, so the primary tool you use for Android development is Eclipse, and we have a plugin. And the way you get started is you create a new project. And we have a bunch of Android templates, but in particular, we have an application project. And when you create your project, you get to choose your application name. So I'll just call it test1. Your project name, that's the Eclipse project name. It doesn't really matter what you call it. And a package name, and I think hopefully you all know what a package is. But you can see we have a pretty long description on the bottom here, what it is, because it's extremely important that you pick the right name, because you will live with this package name forever. Because this is the identity of your application. So if you want to do updates in the future, if you change your package name, that is a new application.
Right, and so your user will lose all of their data, which is not good. Well, it's not that they will lose them, it's just that they won't transfer to the new version.
Yeah, so you may want to avoid words like hack and things like that in your package name. I also want to explain the next couple of settings because they're really important and not everyone understands them. So the minimum required SDK is which version is the lowest version you want to support. And if you go with API 8, that's about 2.1, was it say? 2.2, Froyo, you will target about 97% of the devices that connect to the market today. So that's the minimum. We also have the maximum, and you really should try to target the highest level, because what happens if you pick a lower number, this is basically the number that you've tested with, okay? And if you've only tested your application with, let's say, Gingerbread, it's going to kick in all these compatibility modes. Your app is going to look dated. It's going to put a menu button because it doesn't know if you've thought about what to do.
Right.
So
you said max. It's not actually max. It doesn't mean that it's not going to run on API 20 when you release that in however many months, right? It just means that if you say 17 or 16, you're actually required to, like if the platform requires you to do a permission that wasn't required before, you're required to declare it. So if you don't put 16, potentially you'll run into compatibility mode when you run on 16, and you'll be granted some permission maybe that before were automatically granted.
And then your app just won't look modern.
Yep.
Compile with is basically which target you will compile your app with, and we recommend using the highest available version. This does mean that it's possible for you to use code completion in the Java editor and pull up some APIs that aren't available on all the older devices. We have some other tools to deal with that, which we'll show you, but we think this is a better approach than using, for example, reflection to get to the newer APIs. All right, on the next page, I can configure some stuff like whether this is a library. And we have this icon designer. And this is something that's kind of important too, to make sure that your app or launcher icon follows the visual style guide. The style guides on this platform follow a certain convention. You're supposed to have a distinct silhouette, for example, and a certain size. And so this wizard lets you create some default-looking icons. It's better if you can actually find a graphic designer to do a good icon for you, but this at least hopefully is better than just the default the default icon. And also you can insert an activity. So most projects aren't blank. We have a number of different templates now that you can choose from. For now I'm just going to choose a blank template, which is a very simple UI. And okay, so this is our initial layout. So why don't you explain the project
actually, also one thing that I want to mention is that our template format is, it's open and people can do new templates. And I know already of some developers that have decided to publish some templates on GitHub, so you can go and look for that, and then you'll get access to templates that give you, some library access to some extra features.
So we plan to over time add more templates. So we used to do a lot of samples, and we're going to try to get away from so much of that and more into making things that you can instantiate into your projects.
Right. So what we have here that's created is the result of that template. Very quickly, pretty obviously, you do have some Java code right here. You also have a whole bunch of resources, and so you're going to have the layout here, which is an XML file that describes your UI, which is set here. So in Android, all the UI is done in XML, all the strings is done in XML, and it's, I know some people are saying, well, I can do the same in Java, but really you shouldn't. Resources like, strings, it's obvious. If you want to translate your application in like 40 languages, you're going to want to have that in XML. And then UI, as you start developing your application, maybe you have a phone and, hey, it's easy, I just put everything in Java and it works perfectly. But then you start thinking about, well, what about developers, users who have 10-inch tablets or 7-inch tablet, and then you start doing some crazy code just trying to adapt to
And what about doing landscape and portrait orientations?
Yeah, and then it becomes very complicated. So really, XML is the way to go, and the tools are there to help you deal with all that XML.
So there's this separation between the UI files, which you can basically provide different versions of, and there's this ID that you use to bind to that specific resource from Java code. And it's very important to understand that.
Right.
Do you want to show the R file?
Yes, and then the R file here is basically, it's part of the build process for Android. We automatically generate this R class. It's a bunch of integers that represent all of your resources that are coming from XML, or also from, like, if you have, for example, here a drawable, that says IC launcher, you have IC launcher here. And so you can use that. And actually here you will notice that, similar to what we said about having like landscape versus portrait version, here you actually have 4 different versions of the launcher. That should be the launcher that you chose, that Tor chose, right? That one. And we created it automatically in different sizes to adapt to different devices that have different density.
So the key point is that your code is only ever referring to the field that you're showing, r.id. or r.drawable.ic launcher. Right. It doesn't care what happens at runtime, which actual asset is picked. And that's going to depend on the density of the device and a number of other aspects.
Right. All right. Configuration.
All right, so we mentioned how you have this binding, so I'm just going to show you what we can do here. So if I switch to landscape, you can see that this layout is reused and it stretches because I've used center attributes for this layout right here. What we can do is we can create a new XML resource now that's going to be specialized for landscape. So I go in here and I say that I want to create a new configuration for landscape. And if you look in the file explorer, you can see we now have a new file in this layout-land folder. Let's just throw in a button or something like that for now. So let's see what happens at runtime.
Well, first we can look at it, what happens here, right? When it's changed, we automatically edit the other one so that, based on what you want to render, we'll select the right one. Something else that I want to show you, because when you created the project, in the template, you decided to choose that, your max was 17 and all of that. We also create themes. So the default theme, if you're aware, as a user of Android, the look of Android changed significantly from 2.3, which was gingerbread, and starting in Honeycomb, we had a new look. And so here, this template will create a base theme, which will extend, a different theme. So if you're so value-v14 means that if you're running on 14 and above, it will choose that resource, and you will extend the new holo theme. And then if you choose 11, you will actually extend just the other one, because we have 2 different versions of holo. But then if you go to this one, we just extend the regular light. So your application automatically, depending on which version of Android you use, will use the right theme and will look the same as the rest of the system so that it's consistent. Okay, so that's the base of the resources and files that you have in your project. So I have a tablet here. So of course you want to run your application. So you can do something very simple like run as Android application, and it's going to normally show up here, maybe. There we go. So it's here. I don't know if you can see, but if I rotate it normally. Oh, are you locked?
I'm sorry, I turn on rotation lock here.
There we go. So if I turn, there we go. You can see that the button is here. Yeah, there we go.
This is the custom layout for landscape.
So that's very simple, and it works. Okay, so
and I guess at this point we should point out that this is what most people on the Android team at least do. We deploy on real devices because it's really, really fast. We have an emulator.
Right. So before we go to the emulator, I just want to show you something else, right? I can put a breakpoint here because sometimes you actually want to debug your code. And so it's very easy. You just do debug Android application, and it's going to relaunch it. And yes, and there we go. So all you have to do really is just plug it in, and we automatically do the detection, the USB support, and it just works out of the box. And so that's the basic of debugging, right? You put a breakpoint and it just works automatically. Let me kill that application. There we go, and go back to Java. So now let's say you do something stupid like something like that, and then you decide to run your application again, and you don't have to debug it. And so normally it's going to, all right, so you have a dialog box that says, hey, it crashed. And the number one tool for developers, if you're not aware of it, it's logcat. Basically, every time your application crashes, it's going to output something in a log on your device. And we have a tool in the DDMS perspective right here that called logcat that will show you basically the content of that log. And you can use that either to see all the exceptions that are thrown when your application crashes, but also you can use it to output your own logs. So that
there's a very common beginner issue is they write their app, they hit run, and then it just dies, and they don't know why. This is where you want to look.
And they don't know where to look to see the result. So when something bad happens and your application does something weird, just always go and look at logcat. You can see, and so those are the ones. And you can create filters so that you can filter out, your application. Actually, here we create an automatic filter based on your application, which we didn't used to do before. And you have the rest of the system here, which you can see all the other applications. So apparently, you have Shazam that's doing some GC here. So you can really see everything that happens, right? This is your device. Okay, so the emulator, right? So we do expect developers to at least have one device. That's really speed up development, and it's much better, right? You're using your device, you can play with it, and then you can also test it when you're, outside of your house. But we don't expect developer to have like every single form factor out there. So we have an emulator, which that's interesting. So I'm not going to actually launch it, but the idea of the emulator is that we emulate a full Android device. This is not just, like running or emulating the Android API on top of, macOS or Windows or Linux. This is actually emulating a full device running a full kernel of Linux-based kernel and running all of the Android stack, which really means that you can do everything that you could do on a device. And the ability to configure it to look exactly like you want is really the power there. So for example, we have a list of pre-built devices here. So if you wanted to create, so that's a Nexus 7. So let's say you wanted to create an emulator that looks like a Galaxy Nexus, you just create an AVD. AVD stands for Android Virtual Device. And so you choose Galaxy Nexus, you click Create AVD, and then you can enter all the information here. So it's already pre-built with the right resolution and the right density. You can choose which version of Android you want to run on it. And then you can choose, so for example, if I choose 16, we also have either ARM or x86 based system images, so that if you do native code with the NDK and you want to target exactly a specific version, you can do it here. The other advantage is that we just started shipping x86 images like at I/O, I think, early this year. We have a new virtualization mode so that we can actually run x86 system image at full speed, which makes them much, much faster than with ARM. And then we have some options here. In the emulator, if you emulate a device like the Galaxy Nexus that does not have a hardware keyboard, what's going to happen is that you won't be able to use your hardware keyboard from your laptop, which is very useful when you actually want to test how your layout is going to resize when the on-screen keyboard show up. But for regular testing, that's not very useful. So you just check that, which we check by default because that's probably most of the case that you want to do. And then we basically change the configuration of the device to actually have a hardware keyboard. So you won't be able to see the on-screen keyboard, but you'll be able to type using your keyboard, which is much more useful. You can use cameras. So emulated means that right now you do have some video input, but it's just random, not random, but there's like a checkerboard and a screen, a small square that moves around it. Or you can use a webcam. So if you have a webcam on your laptop, you can actually use that. Memory options, nothing interesting here. The last one that's interesting here is use host GPU. That means that we actually send all the GPU requests to your host machine, like your laptop or your desktop, and that makes the hardware rendering much faster, so you can have an emulator that's really, really fast. So that's a way of creating the device. Now, if you don't see the device that you want here, the Nexus 4 was just released today, and so you might want to actually make something that looks like a Nexus 4. Now, before, we would have to, every time you create an AVD, do all the setup. So now we have this device, so I'm just going to clone the Galaxy Nexus. I'm going to change the resolution. I think it's actually 768. I'm not sure. It's something like that, and it's 4.7. And then you could change some of the other information. And then you say, hey, that's a Nexus 4, clone device, it's right there, and then you can now create any AVD based on that. It will be the right resolution and the right everything. So if you want to create one for API 16, API 17, API 18, 20, 22, whatever.
So I think the takeaway lesson is that when you're building your app and you're working on bugs in your code, you're probably going to be using your phone or tablet because it's just very fast. But you do want to make sure that if you claim in your manifest that you are supporting Froyo, you do want to have an AVD running Froyo, and you want to make sure that it actually does run and doesn't crash. And you might also want to try, if you don't have a 10-inch tablet, to build one like this.
Right. So it's for both different sizes and different versions of Android.
And densities and everything.
Yes. All right.
All right. So let's get back to the templates briefly. So in the new dialog for Eclipse, we have the ability to create new projects, but often you want to add new stuff to a project as well. So we have, for example, the ability to add activities. And so when let's see, I guess we can add the master detail flow. And when I do this, I can configure a few things, and I guess I have to use a higher min SDK. So that's not a good idea. I guess I'll just create the blank one for now. So we are actually working on a library that will backport some of the APIs that these templates use. So in the future, you'll be able to have a more hollow-looking app on older platforms. Okay, is this one? Okay, now I have to create a new name like this. And finally, it's ready to create it. And here we actually get a preview, and you can see that it's now merging in registrations, because often a lot of our samples would say, well, here's this class, and here's this thing you have to put into your manifest. With this template-based approach now, we're actually merging things into the right places to implement this stuff. So here's my new layout. I'm going to show you layout editing briefly. So I think there won't be too many surprises here. You can drag things into the canvas. We have improved support for relative layout now. So that's probably the layout you want to choose because it tends to be pretty expressive. What you don't want to do, which we see a lot, is people nesting linear layouts within linear layouts within linear layouts. That's a bit like HTML tables in the old days. When you sort of have rows and you have columns within, you're going to have really bad alignment if you do that.
It's also bad performance.
And bad performance. That's, they're probably both equally bad, I would say, both slow and poor alignment. Whereas here, when I'm dragging things in here, you can see it's actually offering to do baseline alignment and so forth. Actually, I dragged to the wrong thing. There we go, baseline alignment. So one of the things that we've added in the latest version of the tools is multi-configuration editing. So you can see in this bar above here that I have the ability to change a number of things. So for example, I can switch away from the app theme to theme hollow. This is what it's going to look like if we don't set the theme in the manifest to the white style that we prefer for the template. I can also try different devices, right? So I can see what this layout will look like on a Nexus 7, screen density and so forth.
And you can see here that we both have, actually do we?
We didn't create the AVD. If we created AVD, this would also be available here. So you can instantly get to have the layout editor preview the density and screen size.
So if you have, like, let's say, 3 particular configurations you really care about and you create AVDs for them, they will be at the top so that they're easier to access.
Yeah. So you can also choose languages. Now, it turns out we haven't really done anything in this application. I guess we can. Which language should we do? Thai? Anyone know any Thai? Norwegian. Okay, I know a little Norwegian. All right. So I can choose a language. We'll just put in some tests.
Doesn't sound Norwegian at all.
This is probably not right. I don't really use Norwegian locale on my phone, so I don't actually know how to say it. Okay, so now we have some translations. So you could create this new resource file. we've shown the flag now, yay. And let's see, if I go back to my layout, I can now choose, this other locale. You can see we preview that. And actually, I have some other layouts that have more translations built in. So this one, for example, comes with a bunch of translations that I can switch to. So I hope that's right. So these are configurations. So you can sort of, at design time, you can pick what you want to design for, switch locales, check out your translations, check out your screen sizes. We have a brand new feature to help you sort of keep track of this for multiple configurations. So in this menu on the left here, I can turn on previewing all locales. In fact, let me maximize my editor before I do that. So when I preview all locales, you can see we do a rendering of this layout across all these other locales. So I can instantly see, for example, that in this language, you can see the button is wrapped. I don't know if you can see that on the screen where I'm moving. Yeah, so it's wrapped. So, if I click on it, I switch to that one and I can maybe go in and edit it. And the key thing is also, if I start editing here, these previews are kept up to date. So this is sort of letting me live make sure that things are okay. It's not just a static snapshot.
And it's also an overlay, right? So if you go and say, hey, I want to look at it in landscape, it just switched to landscape. So it's not just like, whatever you were looking at is the same in local, right? If you were to change the theme, everything would change. So it's just like, it's exactly the same as what you have in the main one, with just the local changed.
Yeah, and there's several of these. So here's preview representative sample. It sounds kind of exciting, right? What this is doing is it's saying, okay, well, what does this layout look like on a different screen size? Actually, a couple of different screen sizes. In a different language, different orientation. If I actually were to switch orientation here, you can see this one has now reversed itself. Actually, this one has reversed itself. If I were to switch to different screen size for the main design, it's going to, instead of showing me the Nexus 7 on the main one, the screen size will now go down to the Nexus 1, for example. So it's sort of trying to show me something unrelated but relevant so that I can make sure that I'm not making a big mistake. And there's more of these. So I can, for example, preview all screen sizes, and this will sort of just do a rendering of this of this layout across different screen sizes. So you can see that this is not a very beautiful layout on a 10-inch tablet, right? It's just sort of sitting in the center, and maybe I want to do a custom layout, and you all know how to do that at this point. Let's see. One other thing we do is actually, if you have, so this is basically taking the current layout and rendering it in these other layouts. Now I want to show you what we can do with includes and fragments. So let's see if I remember the name of the layout. Activity home. Okay, let's see. Preview layout version. So this one is showing me basically that I have this layout has variations that are, you can see this little file icon is saying that, hey, this layout looks different in large V11 because there's a custom file for that. And in fact, if I go into, let's see, what is it called? Fragment, dashboard, no, I can't remember what it's called. Actually, I guess I can look at it here. Okay, what is the name of this layout? Fragment preview. Actually, I can't remember what I did. So instead of spending time on that, I'm just going to explain that there's a preview included where if this layout is shown as part of another layout, we can basically preview it here and show you what it looks like in the other layout. I can't remember what I called that file. Another feature we have that's really useful is the ability to do some visual refactoring. So I better save this. So visual refactoring lets me take my layout and make some transformations to it. So you're all familiar with in Java code, you decide, you know what, I want to take this method and I want to pull it up to the super or something. We can do something similar for layouts. So the first thing we may want to do is say that in this layout, we want to create a new, we want to put this into its own layout, for example. So I can then run the visual refactoring and say extract include on that, new layout, foo. And the preview, you can see now it's going to take these things and it's going to morph them into a separate layout that it then opens. And then I have to go and, this is actually a merge, and I don't want to explain why, but that's more performant. It's basically a way to avoid this depth that you get when you insert additional layouts.
Now you can do the show included.
Yeah. Show included. Right. So you can see now I'm editing this layout that actually is included from here. And as I'm making edits over here, test. You can see that it updates and what it looks like in the master layout. Another refactoring we have is the ability to extract styles. So I can do extract style like this, and it sees that, for example, I'm setting a couple of style attributes for layout here, and I may want to say that this is a new type of style, like padding or something. And it's, again, going to go and create new styles and use those styles instead. One of the things we're working on for the next version of the tools is the ability to do more refactoring of your plain Java code. So if you want to change the name of your resource, you can do that. Let's see if I guess I should try it. Let's see, there's my, okay, I maximized my window. So if I, for example, want to go and rename this file, the IC launcher, try that again, to IC launcher, something like this, you can see we now also update all the synchronized resources that are different folder variations, and we also update your XML, for example, here in the manifest file. All right, wow, we're running out of time. I guess I'll quickly show you Lint. So if you're Java developers, you may have used find bugs, or at least you've used your IDE, and the IDE tends to do a lot of static checking for you. So we have a special bug checker for Android, and it's called Lint, like the old tool for C. I guess it's sort of for C. And it's basically trying to find issues in your code, and it's specific for Android. We're not trying to repeat the analysis that Eclipse and IntelliJ and FindBugs are all doing. So it's not going to warn you that you have an assignment and an if or something like that. It's instead looking for things that we know to be problems in Android applications. So I guess I'll just open the options first of all to show you the Lint list. So this is the list of checks we have now. There's about 120 as of
like this morning.
125 as of this morning. And so you can look at these issues. We have explanations for what's going on, and you can also change the severity. And there's this special severity called fatal. If you set the severity to fatal, we actually run Lint without you asking for it when you export your APK. But it only checks for issues that are of type fatal. And if it finds any fatal issues, it'll actually cancel out of exporting. So most of the checks haven't actually been marked as fatal. There are a few, and you can go and set more of them as fatal. You can also set some to error, depending on your team's policies, right? If you want lint-free code, you can switch everything to error so that it'll fail to build. So I guess let's just try to run Lint on some code and see what it says. So we have a Lint toolbar action. Where did it go? I think the screen size kind of tripped me up. It's sitting over here. That's weird. Can I drag it? Yay, Eclipse 4. Okay, so I can click on the drop-down button. You can see I can check all projects or selection, or I can clear Lint warning. So I'll just say check all projects. And this opens my output window, which is now sitting in the top right corner. And you can see we get a full list of the issues that it's finding. It's still running. Let me actually maximize this so we can see it. And you can see that for each one of these errors, you really want to read the explanation. If you just get the one-line summary of the bug, there are some issues that we can't really explain in one line. So if you're not sure what it means, please go read the explanation in the Lint window. Or if you want to run Lint as part of your continuous integration, someone has written a Jenkins plugin. That's pretty nice. Actually, you get the trend graph, so you can see that which check-ins introduced issues, and better yet, which ones reduced the count.
So there's a lot of check there, right? You're going to have things like, hey, you forgot to translate that string, maybe because you added it after your translator imported the strings. But there's also a lot of best practices of things that really you should be doing in your app that, and we want to include a lot of the things that are in the style guide now. We have a lot of work to add even more of that, but there's a lot that are very interesting. And we're running out of time, but I think that the last one you really mentioned, that you mentioned right at the beginning, is when you compile against API, the latest one, but you target something earlier, we have a check that will detect actually that you're using an API that's higher than your main SDK. And that's perfectly fine as long as you, put that under a code. There's actually an API to say, hey, what's the current API that I'm currently running on? So if you protect that inside an if block to only call that when you can, that's perfectly fine, and that's the way of
right.
doing some extra.
So I can show it. So here, I remember we're targeting API 11. It was a EFREI, I guess, in our app. So here, I just call get action bar, and if I hover over it, you can see we have an error now. This is not coming from Eclipse. This is an API check we've added. I didn't have to run Lint. I just hit Control S. We run incremental Lint that for those that don't require global analysis, like unused resources, we run them incrementally. And here it's saying, hey, this API call requires API 11, which you're targeting 8. So you're going to need to do something about that. And I can say, well, I know what I'm doing, so I can suppress this error. Or I can say, I want to target, this method is basically targeting, this class is targeting Honeycomb, API 11. And I know that this class will only be loaded by my code under a conditional. So that's basically how I deal with this. And that's why we recommend that you use the latest build target, because you'll have access to all the APIs and you can use them conditionally, because we have this check now to make sure that you don't accidentally introduce older API calls.
All right, and we are almost out of time. So do we have time for maybe a couple of questions?
It says time's up, so last chance.
All right.
Okay, we have a hand.
Yes, it's a lot of that is in all of it is in 21, except for the refactoring.
Yeah, well, almost all the refactoring I showed you, except for resource refactoring, is coming in. That's coming in 22, but everything else is in 21, which is almost out.
Yes, very, very, very soon.
Very, very soon.
And there was another question, I think, here. I'm sorry. Why can't they emulate a lot of things? We try to emulate as much hardware as we can. So we have a way of inputting multi-touch event, webcam, sensors. We really want to add as much as we can. But right now, for example, there's things like Bluetooth, NFC. It's going to be very hard to emulate them. You'll have to use like another device to do it or something. We're working on adding as much as we can, but you can do a lot already. All right, thank you.
Thank you.